There has been quite a lot of pony news since the teaser trailer I analyzed about a month ago. There have been a lot of merch drops, some of which actually look pretty appealing. I may have bought a thing or two already. There was the reveal of the characters' hobbies, which were very interesting. There were the songs for Izzy and Pip, there's the PG rating and the 90-minute movie length, there were GIFs, there was confirmation of Sunny and Hitch's relationship as childhood friends, there was unboxing, there was a 360 spin shot, there was Russian bias, there was Friendship Day. I have my own thoughts and opinions on all of these things, but it's far too much for one video. I want this video to kind of have a theme rather than be just a scatterbrained review of everything we know. So, like a true Tolkien fan, I have decided to focus on the one thing that matters most. Maps. Oh, I love fantasy. I love maps. This map isn't very detailed, but there's still some information to be gleaned here. This map is certainly reminiscent of the maps of Equestria and G4. It's even drawn in a similar style. Bridlewood and Maritime Bay are often kind of random corners of Equestria. Dr. Wolf suggested that they take up the ancient equestrian locations of Whitetail Woods and Baltimore, respectively. I think I agree with that assessment. Maritime Bay is a little too far south, but the reason for that could be as simple as Sunny is in the way of where it should be, so we just put it here. More interesting to me is this railroad. This is clearly the same railroad that ran through the mountains to the far north in the Crystal Empire in G4. Since the railroad is still depicted in this map, I take it that the Crystal Empire is still around and still has contact with the rest of Equestria. Probably it's simply that the image was cut off right before the Crystal Empire, since the focus locations for the movie are Bridlewood Forest, Maritime Bay, and Zephyr Heights. Adding the Crystal Empire to the map would cause more confusion than anything, but undoubtedly it still exists. And going by the railroad, presumably it still has contact with the rest of Equestria. I personally would love to see the Crystal Empire in the beautifully detailed animation style they're using for G5, presumably at some time in the series rather than in the movie. If the Crystal Empire and therefore the Crystal Ponies do show up, that opens the gateway to the writers expanding the scope of the story beyond the 3 pony species to other species that exist in the equestrian world. I'd expect and hope the focus stays mostly on the ponies. The brand is My Little Pony after all, and the ponies are just the cutest. But the Crystal Ponies are ponies, so I'd be totally down to see them have a bit more emphasis and focus in G5, and maybe even we can get some answers to basic questions like, are there Crystal Pegasi and unicorns? Do the Crystal Ponies have some kind of crystal magic, etc.? Bringing the Crystal Ponies into the narrative of G5 could actually have some really interesting implications because so much of G5 is focused on the conflict and tensions between the different pony species. Although more isolated and less numerous than the other 3 pony species, the Crystal Ponies probably had a part to play in this as well. They probably mistrust the other 3 pony species and the other 3 mistrust them, maybe even seeing them as more of outsiders than the others who are at least vaguely in the same region and have a common history with events like the founding of Equestria and everything that happened in G4. Actually, the more I think about it, I'm really surprised the Crystal Ponies had nothing to do with the inclusion narrative of G4's seasons 8 and 9. Where were the Crystal Ponies when the villains got all the different creatures to mistrust each other? And where were they when every creature got back together for the ultimate friendship rainbow laser? I know I'm just speculating off of nothing here. It's literally just a railroad. But I think this would be an interesting route to explore. But I'm dodging the big revelation here. This is Canterlot. Indisputably. Just look at it. And it's called Zephyr Heights. This is a big deal. The pony species are living separately, but I assumed that they would settle where there were already large populations of their kind. G4 Canterlot is almost entirely populated with unicorns, so I expected unicorns to congregate there, and other ponies would have to move out. But then the Pegasi would be homeless. They lived in the clouds, but when the magic, including flight, was lost, many Pegasi would have been homeless. They would have had nowhere to gather. But somehow they ended up in control of the capital city of Canterlot. I can only imagine they took up their ancient warrior ways, many of them were already soldiers of one kind or another in G4, and invaded Canterlot to secure themselves a home. They won the war, and now the unicorns were homeless, which is why they ended up settling in a forest of all places. This is pretty dark stuff. Whether or not I'm right on all the details, Somehow the Pegasi ended up in control of a predominantly unicorn city. No wonder the unicorns mistrust the Pegasi, up to the level where a Pegasus in Bridlewood Forest has to put on a cloak and a unicorn horn. Now here's the interesting thing. It's no secret that G5 is being created with themes of diversity, inclusion, and activism in mind. In other words, they went political. We can only assume the narrative of mistrust between different pony species is supposed to mirror racism in our own world. Knowing that, I kind of expected to see unicorn privilege. I mean, unicorns had all the power in G4. They had magic, they controlled the capital, they filled important positions like Celestia's protege and future ruler of Equestria, captain of the guard, head mayor of the School of Friendship, need I go on? But it seems in G5 there has been a reversal of fortunes. The Pegasi control the former capital. The Pegasi have an illustrious city with sweeping architecture and modern engineering. The Pegasi have an elite royal family and a princess pop star. Rather than unicorn privilege, G5 is presenting a narrative of Pegasus privilege. As I mentioned earlier, the unicorns live in a forest. They don't even have a properly developed city in comparison to the modern metropolis that Zephyr Heights appears to be. Also of note is Hitch's hobby of listening to music. I wondered earlier what music he listens to. Since the pony species live separately, I thought he must be listening to Earth pony music. But would they have to come up with some Earth pony pop star for him to listen to? No. Now I'm thinking he listens to Princess Peace Petals. It would be a great opportunity to introduce the character and her music early in the movie before we actually get to meet her later on. I think the Pegasi have a kind of cultural dominance over the other pony species. Think like the United States and Latin America. When I was living in Argentina, everyone knew who the President of the United States was and what he was up to. I think it's the same sort of deal with the Pegasi and G5's Equestria. Now here's something I've been ignoring for too long. There has been a lot of discussion around G5 about its apparent political agenda. It's literally the first thing we knew about G5, thanks to that Kidscreen article all the way back in January. I've seen numerous videos and discussions about the topic, so it's time for me to put in my 2 bits. Stop worrying about it! Many different franchises have attempted to tackle themes of diversity, and there are ways of doing it wrong and ways of doing it right. It goes wrong when the quality of the story suffers because diversity and politics get in the way, or the writers never really had a good idea and didn't actually care about the story or the franchise, they just wanted to preach politics. Other series have managed to include diversity in a way that felt natural to the story and enhanced the characters, their conflicts, and their complexities, rather than just leaving them as a blank slate or a Mary Sue. And we just don't know enough about G5 yet to say with surety how well or how poorly this is going to go. Here's what we do know. The creators of G5 care about what they are creating. They hired people who worked on G4, and they even hired fan artists. The animation is phenomenal, the characters are complex and multifaceted. Let's look at Zip, for example. She's a cool athlete and a rebel falling into the same stereotype as Rainbow Dash. But she isn't like Rainbow Dash, because she wants to fly but she can't. This will be a source of conflict for her, I'm sure. She also has an interest in science. I expect she's interested in aerodynamics and is trying to figure out flight, but regardless, this is a character with conflict and complexity. A character who defied my initial expectations of simply her appearance. If, for example, she is lesbian for diversity's sake, the character is still there. This is not a blank slate. This is good representation and good diversity, where an underrepresented group is represented by a character who has complexity and conflict beyond their one underrepresented trait. I don't know if she will be lesbian or anything else, but my point is that it does not appear that the political agenda is getting in the way of good storytelling. I've seen a lot of complaining, anger, frustration, and hate directed at G5 for taking on political themes, and I've had enough. Don't kids need to know that racism is bad? Don't kids need to know that not everyone is straight and cisgender and that is okay? I'm surprised at all this backlash because ponies are actually the perfect instrument to teach lessons about diversity and inclusion. G4 taught friendship lessons all the time. The main 6 of G4 were an incredibly diverse group. G4 even reached out and taught more political lessons about inclusion as the series progressed. My Little Pony is about learning to get along with others who are different from you. Is it so much of a stretch to imagine that MLP could teach this lesson by showing how it can go wrong? This is a natural continuation of G4 in my view. And no, they haven't undone everything Twilight did or retconned G4, and they're not saying that the main 6 were flawed heroes and that the new main 5 are better. G4 is referred to as ancient Equestria. It has been a long time since G4. Let me tell you a story from a sacred text in my religion, the Book of Mormon. After Jesus Christ died on the cross and was resurrected, he visited the people of the Americas. He taught the gospel and returned the people to righteousness after generations of wickedness. The period after he left was the high point in all the Book of Mormon. The people stopped dividing themselves into tribes, class distinctions disappeared, war disappeared, crime disappeared. It was glorious and beautiful. Do you want to know how long it lasted? 50 years later, a group of people revolted from the Church of Christ and took on one of the old tribal names. 170 years later, pride and class distinctions had returned. 200 years later, the people had fallen into a state of wickedness greater than any recorded in the Book of Mormon. 350 years later, the people were fighting in a terrible war and committing mass genocide, rape, and cannibalism. Does that mean that Jesus Christ failed or that he was flawed? No! If history has taught me two things, it's 1, nothing lasts forever. 2, evil always comes back. I suspect it's been more than 350 years since G4. Twilight and the others didn't fail, and they weren't inferior to the main 5 of G5. They were so good at what they did that Sunny idolizes them. This isn't a failure. This is reality. Excuse my rant. I guess you all think I'm a liberal now, but let me pose this question. Are diversity and inclusion really political? Or is it just basic moral decency to treat others with fairness and not make assumptions based on the demographic boxes they fill? Here's a twist. I'm not a liberal. I'm a moderate. I hold some liberal views and some conservative views. That has nothing to do with treating others fairly, and it has nothing to do with my hype for G5. Therefore, all things whatsoever ye would that ponies should do to you, do ye even so to them. We cool?